evening and welcome to the February 16th, 2016 regular Salem City Council meeting. It will now come to order. If everybody would please rise, we'll have the invocation and then have the Pledge of Allegiance following that. Lord, watch over us this wintry evening, allowing us to consider all that comes before us this evening with wisdom and in strength, and watch over all of us that are here this evening on our journey home. Amen. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Would the clerk pro tem please call the roll?
Mr. Brown,
Present.
Mr. Cushman,
Here.
Mrs. Dickey,
Here.
Mr. Gall,
Here.
Mr. Nestick,
Here.
Mr. Paparotis.
Here.
7 present, Mr. President.
Thank you. Everybody's received a copy of the minutes of the February 2nd, 2016 meeting. Are there any additions, corrections, or deletions to those minutes? Seeing none, they'll stand as approved. There's no petitions and remonstrances this evening. Move on then to receiving of visitors. First is Kim Spencer, subject dog attack.
Good evening. Okay, I'm Kim Spencer. I live 1356 Pembroke. And the incident happened on 540 Etna. And the victim was my granddaughter. She was 8 years old. This happened last August 15th. She was playing with the neighbor boy, which they have a shared drive, so it's close quarters. Her mother had called her in. Her mother was outside, and she said, "Natalie, we're gonna be going in, get ready for bed." So she came across the drive. The neighbor boy was putting one of their dogs into the house, the back door, opened the door, and as he was putting one dog in, their other dog ran out of the door, across the drive, jumped on my granddaughter, knocked her down, and got her right here. My daughter and the little boy was wrestling with this dog to try to get her off of her. Thank God that the dog did not clamp all the way down, and he loosened up enough, and with the two of them pulling, they got the dog off. So my daughter took my granddaughter to the hospital. They transported her to Akron Children's, which the one was pretty deep, but it did not get the artery, but she did bleed a lot. She actually thought she was going to die because she'd never witnessed anything like that. So Children's Akron did surgery to clean the wounds, and they stitched her, then sent her home with antibiotics, pain medication, and all this ritual of we were afraid of an infection, which she came out okay with that. The dog was in quarantine, which is at the neighbor's house. The police department in Salem was terrific. The health department and the dog warden we were told they had all their papers to the prosecuting attorney's office. And what we're understanding is then the prosecuting attorney either files charges or whatever, it gets to a judge decides if the dog's to be put down or whatever. That's what we were told. If the owner appeals, then they have to do such and such stipulations. The dog is still there. We've never been told anything as far as a decision, or if it's even, as far as we know, it's still at the prosecuting attorney's office. So I'm reading a lot of, the communication that the committee has had about the dog ordinances and stuff. I don't know the ordinances, what's projected completely. But I am wondering if this dog would be proven to be vicious or dangerous. Is it Salem that would decide what would happen with this type of dog, or is it still the county? It seems like it's been 6 months, and it's like, so she doesn't really go out to play unless other people are there. And frankly, she has said, well, they don't care about me. The police lied to me. And I keep telling her, no, that police officer did not lie to her. Because that police officer, she was terrific with my granddaughter. But my granddaughter is so afraid of that dog, and she basically loves animals. She still wants to work with animals, but she's definitely afraid of that dog. So I'm just kind of wondering if the ordinances would change. I can't say where it would change at the county level, because I'm thinking the county would still be the final decision maker. I could be wrong, I don't know. But that's about it in a nutshell.
Hey. Mr. Whitehill.
Just to respond, I know we have a couple others as well on the same topic, and when we get to those ordinances, I want to make sure we do clarify some of those differences for you as well. These are mostly Salem ordinances to match up with state statute, and so we will cover some of that as well. It's just, and then we'll also possibly get the law director to clarify in addition to that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Scott Cahill, Procurement.
Thank you, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen of council, Mr. Mayor. I had talked earlier about the procurement for engineering services, and the city has purchased engineering services a lot over the past number of years. And I think it very, very important that we look at the methodologies that we employ and that we improve on them, as I voiced before. And I did some research. The methods that were employed by the mayor, the safety director, and Ms. Brothers were legal in every way. In fact, they pretty much followed the letter of a document on procurement. However, I believe that it was improper and probably not as ethically proper as we can make it. And I would like to read section 6.1 out of the Ohio Ethics Commission book. Ethics and the purchase requisition. Prior to either making the purchase directly, the agency must prepare specifications that clearly describe the need. Clear and concise specifications are critical to success of the purchase. If written incorrectly, the need will not be met, and the agency will have spent time and money needlessly. These are for agencies of the state that these are written, but of course it applies secondarily to our city as well. One common pitfall is permitting a local and or favorite vendor to have a key role in writing the specification. The vendor's description may very clearly outline their product, but may also exclude other vendors from offering their items to the agency. This creates an unfair advantage, is contrary to Ohio laws for competitive procurement, and could lead to allegations of favoritism. The agency should seek information from multiple sources and then prepare a specification that provides all interested bidders with an opportunity to supply the need. And I'll go to another section here and read only a single sentence just for the sake of brevity. Any action on the part of the agency, including that of a particular vendor, is being treated differently than others, gives rise to unethical conduct by the agency. And then they go on to discuss perceived unethical conduct as well. I think that there is absolutely nothing wrong with a city having a preferred engineer. And I think that a procurement for a preferred engineer is something that you may want to address. I think that the methodologies that were employed are inappropriate. There's no way that any other engineer, unless they happen to live in Salem and happen to have done work for the city, both of which are prohibited by the fact that we award all the work to Howells and Baird. Therefore, no one else can win the bid under the procurement that was put forth. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with it, and I'm not saying that we don't want Howells and Baird to do all our work. I'm just saying the methodology employed is not appropriate. I think that we need to have a way, if we're soliciting bids, I think that we should see numbers from 2 or 3 bidders. I think it only is prudent. That is allowed for under the law, that is allowed for under the procurement regulations, and it's reasonable. It is unreasonable to qualify people, have 3 highly qualified firms, disqualify 2 of those because they don't live here, and then negotiate with the remaining firm. I just think that we can do a better job than that. I don't want to just sit here and drama. I don't think anybody's trying to do something rotten or anything like that. I just think we can do better than that, guys. It looks so seedy to the people of this city. I beat my drum and I beg these people to come up with this money, and we can't just hand out $3 million contracts the way we've been doing things. I think this is a great opportunity right now to do things better. And I think we can find a better methodology to employ, and perhaps that means sitting down with an engineer who we prefer to use, not soliciting proposals from others, and simply negotiating out a valid, good contract with that singular engineer. Having been a guy that bid projects up most of his life, it's a horrible thing to bid a project, to be qualified, and to be not considered. That's unfair. These people spend thousands of dollars to put these proposals together. Also, as we go through this paving project, I want to make sure that one of the big concerns I have, and Mr. Gall brought this up a bit with consideration for water lines and things. Obviously, we have an issue with some of our water lines in our city, to the point where buildings have burned down because of the infrastructure that lies beneath our pavement. I did a project one time, I can't remember where it was, but the idea was that we would put down the base pavement across the entire project. It was a big site, and then we'd work on that, and then at the end of the project, we just put the topping down and it'd be all done. What happened was, when all the utility contractors came in and excavated for all the base utilities and patched this many, many times, when we put the topping down, we ended up with a patchwork mess that had to be planed and repaved. I think it's very important, even if we don't do as much paving as we had conceived initially doing, that we address the infrastructure beneath those paved streets, that we do repair, so that we have an element that is absolutely complete, that we can have for 20 years, and that we hopefully never get in the situation, obviously things will come up, but that we don't get in the situation repeatedly where we're tearing up brand new, beautiful, good pavement in order to repair a main or a valve or a line or a sewer. Thank you so very much again.
Thank you. Lisa Chambers, dog attack.
Hi, my name's Lisa Chambers. Really quick, I just want to say I'm sorry to hear about your granddaughter. That right now is my biggest fear. Friday, sorry, I'm going to try and take deep breaths here. Friday, I took my 5-month-old puppy outside of my house on 4th Street. So we could use the restroom because my kids had Valentine's Day parties that I was supposed to attend to. A neighbor across the street who we've had issues with before, we've multiple times asked them to put their dog in the fence or leash it, something, take care of it the correct way. It's a full-grown pit bull. They opened up the door, let the dog loose, turned around and shut the door. I tried very hard to get my dog in the house. We made it to the front porch. The pit ran up, grabbed my dog, whose name is Thor, and he pulled us 19 feet down the walkway to the main sidewalk. At one point, I tried to pull Thor back towards me. The pit went for his throat and got my hand. I have appointments coming up to see doctors, specialists. It's very possible that I have permanent nerve damage in my hand. The house is where my kids' bus stop is. 3 of my kids and several neighbor kids get on and off the bus every day there. If at any time my kids are outside with a dog, with our puppy, or just playing, and this dog just decides to come out, and that's it, round 2, what is gonna happen if my kid gets drugged 19 feet? Today I was told that dogs have a 1 free bite rule. That sometimes they bite and nothing happens the first time. That it's like a pass. The owners, they might have to pay for medical bills, but that's it. I was hoping something else could be put in place to hold owners more accountable for what happens. Multiple times they were told to leash it. We found out recently there's no dog license and no shot record, which is very bad news for me because now I'm the one going through all of this with the rabies and everything else possible that this dog has. If these people are so negligent, how are they able to have 1 free bite with the possibility that something could happen to a neighborhood kid or my kid? I just don't understand it, and I would like clarification on what could be changed here and what we could do to fix this, because this just cannot happen. My 12-year-old loves playing outside with my dog, and if this was my kid, I don't know what kind of decision he would have made. He very well could have, it would have been a lot worse than what happened with me. I thank you guys for listening, and I really, really hope we can come to something. Thank you very much.
Mrs. Dickey.
I have a question for you. Who
Yeah.
told you the 1 free bite?
The dog warden, and I was looking up Ohio laws. We're going through, we have not found an attorney. We're talking to several, looking through. But we keep seeing about this 1 free bite. And the dog warden did bring it up, that there's a gray area there. She did say that the prosecutor will go through and look and see their side of the story, my side of the story. But it does happen, where dogs bite and then they're kind of given, well, we'll just see where it goes. This thing is obviously, and it might just be the male dominance, that's very well, what it could have been. But it doesn't matter if my kid was out there with a dog and he tried to establish dominance with my puppy, there would be no fight.
Is that dog there now still?
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Cushman.
Thank you, Mr. President. You didn't mention it, or maybe I didn't hear it, but did you file a police report?
We did,
Okay.
that day. The cops beat the ambulance to the house, and they were very helpful. The couple of the officers that were at the hospital with me, yes, we filed a report immediately, and we need to take this as far as we possibly can, because to think that a kid, this to me, it's bad, but it could have been so much.
If you don't mind me asking, what's
Yes.
the neighbor's position since this happened? Have you talked to them?
No, they're taking it out on Facebook, saying that my dog turned on me, even though the police know that's in the report. Their dog had my blood. It was just covered in blood. There were witnesses that had to pull the dog off of me. So that's not gonna stick it on. I'm not worried about that sticking. But they're making it very difficult. And it just proves to me that they should not be able to have this kind of an animal probably not even a cat. You know, if they can't own up to the responsibility of shots, and if you have something this deadly, why not take care of it the right way? You know, they have kids in the house. It just, but yes, we did file.
Thank you.
Mr. Nestic?
Do you know I don't even know what the procedure is, but we do have a leash law that a dog has to stay on a leash or be confined in a yard.
They were asked several times.
But were they written up? I mean, what is the procedure? Did they get a ticket, like the police fine them? I mean, it's supposed to be a minor misdemeanor of the first offense and a fourth degree for each subsequent offense. I mean, what is our response? I'm just curious. I don't know what the city's response was to something like this.
I do have one thing to say about that. There was one incident at this house, I'm gonna say it was maybe a month ago, and they've had issues there for months. The cops were called one night, a fight, or who knows what it was. They showed up, and the dog was running around outside on Vine Street, running up and down Vine, going up to the officers, barking away, doing whatever. And they said, "Why isn't this dog on a leash?" And the owner said, "There's not a vicious bone in his body. He's never done anything. He would never hurt anyone." And that now this, I don't blame the officers, but they left giving these people high fives and nothing. That's all I know. Me and some other neighbors have asked them to put the dog on a leash. They have a big fenced-in area. It hasn't happened.
Mrs. Dickey?
I will say that I did see the entry. I'm assuming it's the same people on Facebook, and they are taking no responsibility for their dog. As a matter of fact, she's showing a picture of her own injury when she finally got a hold of the dog and took it in after a neighbor beat it off of
Yeah.
her. And it's a scrape on her arm, and then she's trying to show injuries to her own dog, pretty much putting the blame on the victim.
With that, when she showed up, because the witnesses, they see her walking down the street like you would go check your mailbox. It's just she didn't care. She got there, my dog gave up. He's bleeding. He knew he was in trouble, and he's under my legs looking up at me. And the dog had a hold of his leg. My hand was in such bad shape, I couldn't get this pit bull off of my puppy at all. I just had to look at him bite his leg. She walked up to get her dog off of my dog, and I know this probably, it really doesn't matter at all, but she was never in the position to be near my dog, because at the point she got there, my dog gave up.
Dr. Conrad, normally it's council, but because instead of making you wait until it will be your time to speak and bringing her back up, I'm gonna let you go now.
I'm with the health department now,
Oh, okay, great.
and I wasn't here Friday, I was in Columbus, but anyhow, when I came back Saturday, police department called me,
Okay,
and it was Patrolman Hank took your case.
yes,
And he said, we're hoping, there's a neighbor, and you know the neighborhood, I
yes.
has a surveillance camera, and they think the attack is on the surveillance. So we're waiting for the footage. You have-
Yeah, but,
Okay.
but we were hoping to keep that from the owners.
Well,
Um,
that's fine, I don't think they have any
They,
right to
that
it.
is how we know so much. She's walking down the street casually like it's nothing.
Well, I read the report, and she didn't even come out of the house.
She did not. I was
A
screaming.
neighbor did.
Yes.
Take the dog off, right.
Yes,
And,
that's
and
how
then-
they
And
know.
then I thought in the report, now the problem is, I read it Saturday. So maybe I'm wrong on this, but I thought the dog did have a history where it has bit, and it's not a first bite. I thought it had bit another neighbor. So I thought this was the second
Okay.
time. But maybe I'm wrong on that. I read it Saturday, and there was a lot, the patrolman, Hank, did a great job.
Okay, you very well could be right. I know nothing about this dog. I know they weren't the first owners.
Would you know it, and have you talked to other neighbors and found out if anybody else has been bit?
No one in my neighborhood has said anything about being bit. And the house is really close to me. They all know, this dog has given them problems, and we've all had problems. But we do know they're not the first owners. But at the same time, at first, when they first moved in and they were first there, I didn't pay much attention to them. It wasn't until the trouble started. And I don't know where the dog came from. So if they moved in from somewhere else, and it's very possible it could have been someone, or even someone in their house. I don't know the situation. I just know I was told today about the first bite rule, or law, or whatever it is. I hope that can change, though.
Attorney Zellers.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just to follow up on a couple things that were said here,
Mhm.
and starting with a comment from Mr. Nestick, the city of Salem currently has a law requiring that all dogs be confined on their property or off the property on a leash. There's no exceptions to that. Well, I shouldn't say that. There are a few exceptions, service dogs, things of that nature,
Yes.
police dogs, which I assume we don't have in this case. So we have a criminal violation there just based on what you've explained. But getting to the heart of the matter and these ordinances that are coming out this evening for passage or not for passage, one of the things, or several of the things that we're trying to address in this is getting somebody in our city authorized to make the dog designations, and that would be the health department. If these ordinances were to pass, that they specifically would authorize I'm gonna screw this up because I wrote it, health commissioner, to make those dog designations. If people challenge them, then of course we will go to court and fight for those things.
Okay.
And there will be several dog designations. A vicious dog, which will not be allowed in the city of Salem under any circumstance, would be a dog that caused serious physical harm to somebody by biting them. If in fact you were to have long-term nerve damage, as you indicated, and I hope that you do not, then that would be the type of injury that would designate that dog as vicious, no longer allowed in the city of Salem.
Okay.
If that dog was designated one step down for biting you and not causing serious harm, that dog would be a dangerous dog. And under those circumstances, the owner would be required to have liability insurance and take some other steps. If they can't do that, then that dog is not welcome in the city of Salem and could not be here either. And if they do continue to maintain that dog here, they would be committing a further criminal offense of which they could suffer a fine and a jail penalty. Okay, so those are the things that we're looking at that can hopefully address, but unfortunately, it's always after the fact.
Yes,
You know,
absolutely.
we don't know what's in a dog's mind before they do these things. We might have a guess, because I've lived next to
Exactly.
dogs like that, but unfortunately, until they do something is the problem. But once we have these things in place, and we can start making those designations, it sounds like we have people in here, we can start the list to get the dogs processed for designation. You know, your grandson, your situation, I know we've had other people come in here before, and start getting some of these things taken care of, and hold these owners responsible, because that's what we need to do. People that don't want to own up to the problems, we need to hold them accountable, and that's what I hope is going to happen in these ordinances. Should I add something?
I just have
Mr.
a question.
Whitehill.
I have a question real quick, if I may, point of order, and it goes back to the discussion I had with Mr. Chambers on the weekend. In their case, if these ordinances pass tonight, would they still apply to their situation that happened a few days ago? Does it go backwards?
Well, under those circumstances, and Mr. Whitehill alluded to this earlier, the authority for our officers, our police officers, already exists under the Ohio Revised Code to make those things happen, to get the dogs designated through, whether it has to be the county health department or the city, that's to be hashed out, but it could still happen. So the things that happened before the passage of these can still be dealt with in the same manner that we're gonna hopefully deal with dogs in the future. We're just trying to streamline the process by giving the city the same authority that the county has, in case the county doesn't act fast enough, whatever it would be
Okay.
that would allow us to move that process along. And to clarify one other thing as well, there is no one bite rule that exists in these ordinances or in the current status of the Ohio Revised Code that I'm aware of. There is officer discretion, which would include dog wardens and police officers and health departments. They would have discretion on what steps they took. And
Okay.
some of them, if they don't feel the situation is severe enough, do have that discretion granted to them to not take the actions that are laid out here. And perhaps that's what they're talking about. But I think what they factor in are things like owner responsibility. If we know that these people are not taking responsibility for it,
Yeah.
then I imagine they're probably more likely to take action than otherwise. So.
Okay.
Mr. Whitehill.
Just one more comment. I think, as we learned in this process early on through one of our earliest meetings, just the fact that the police respond and funnel the information directly to the health department now is actually an improvement that was made from these discussions and from this process. So
Okay,
that's just kind of an FYI part of that as well.
okay, great, okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
That concludes the receiving of visitors. We'll move on to the report of city officials. Mayor Berlin.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would just like to thank the street department and their workers for the diligent efforts that they put into clearing the streets for the people that reside in the community. Nobody can really understand how much work is involved in that. And everybody wishes that it could be a lot quicker, but they do a fabulous job. They work long hours. My secretary is on vacation this week, and I can attest to the fact that I had countless calls come in, and so did Mr. Kent's. We answered the calls, trying to make sure that everybody was taken care of. But believe me, these guys work hard, and I really do appreciate them. Once they get done with the main streets, and they have to go over them several times, they begin to work on the alleys, and many of the alleys are where people have to pull off of because we put a parking ban in effect. They may pull into garages off of alleys. The city's riddled with alleys all over, and we just have to get the main streets done first. So I'd just like to give them a round of thanks. I also, I guess I could ask at this time if there are any questions regarding the qualifications-based selection law that we followed here in the city recently. If anybody has questions, I'll be happy to try and
Mr.
answer.
Brown.
I have a couple of questions for the mayor, if you don't mind. First of all, I owe the mayor an apology. I'll give it to it in public instead of in an email. He said that I was chairman of the Street Sidewalks and Alleys Committee in 2012, and I was. You got my apology for that. My mind's a little sappy, but I do apologize for that. But somebody was kind enough, perhaps yourself, gave me a copy of the ordinance for street maintenance program that was given to Howes and Baird. And I went through here and I noticed that it was given for bids, which means there are more than one, more than two, probably more than three people that made bids on this. And I can understand it. That's one reason why I didn't even offer to stop that or have it go to a meeting for that simple reason. The bids were done, and the lowest bidder was given a contract. That's why I didn't read that.
I'm not sure what you're speaking of. You mean in the past for street maintenance work? Yeah, when we advertise for the bid package, we get the lowest bid. We don't necessarily get the lowest price, but we get the lowest bid.
I understand that. But I looked at this and I said, well, they used good judgment, so I didn't bother having any questions about it, so we presented it now. I do have a couple of questions for you this evening about the resolution 3 that has to get through tonight because they've got a big paving contract going out for $3 million. We have a big contract going out for the contracting engineer. But like I said, I do have a couple of questions. First question is very, very simple. As chairman of this committee, I have to ask, but you had on your committee to do the evaluation, yourself, Mr. Kentz, and Mrs. Brothers. And being the amount of this contract, is there a reason why that Mr. Paprotis, chairman of the Streets, Alleys, and Sidewalks at that time, was not on the team?
The law director prepared an ordinance back in the fall after the passage of the income tax.
I saw a copy of it.
And in it, it designated the mayor, the auditor, and the director of public service and safety shall meet to select engineering services.
Wasn't
So we
that
just followed the program that
I
was
understand.
provided
Wasn't
in
that
the
tabled?
ordinance. Pardon?
Wasn't that tabled?
It was tabled because it said that we were gonna advertise for quotes for engineering services, and at that time, I indicated to the law director that that is going to be an illegal process, and he said, then we'll pull it.
Yeah,
And we
advertising,
tabled it,
yes.
because we went
That-
for the
I
RF,
thought it-
request for qualifications, not for quotes. We kept within the guidelines of the Ohio Revised Code
You sure
in that
did.
regard. So that's pretty much the reason why that was tabled and pulled. It would have been, I don't know, the law director may be able to comment. We would have gotten into a lot of trouble if we had enacted this with quotes. The ACEC, as you know,
sought to prevent a bid opening taking place in the utility department in 2012. And we followed pretty much what the utility department had to do to follow the law to the letter
I follow.
in order to get to the point where we got to, so.
I only have one other question.
Yeah.
Do you sincerely believe the points given to Howes and Baird, Matthew Burrs and Associates, or Brexville and DOZ of Cleveland were awarded with a lot of consideration?
Absolutely,
Evaluation for us?
absolutely. And if we had not negotiated the contract pricing with Howes and Baird to the extent that we felt satisfactory, we would have gone to number 2. It's interesting that the qualifications-based program published by the Architects and Engineers and Surveyors of Ohio through their Council of Engineering include things like proximity and past performance for the authority. I called Don Bader, the chairman of the American Council of Engineers, and asked him why those things were left in, and he didn't have a real good answer. I said, well, if it's something that we should ignore and take out of our qualifications-based process, then please have the Ohio Revised Code change this. I think they actually do like to have treatment of local vendors, local suppliers, and local people perhaps reviewed first. Engineers would have asked or lobbied to have that changed, but they haven't. So in my estimation, we did nothing wrong. I actually spoke to another engineer today that has gone through this process, and I asked how many times have they been selected first and been passed up, and they said virtually never. They are always able to negotiate a contract that's satisfactory within the bounds of the complexity of the project. So, but the initial quote that we had from Howes and Baird was unacceptable. We let them know that, and they came down. That's one thing you can't do when you receive a bid, is negotiate a better price. And this qualification-based program actually allows you to do that.
It does.
You negotiate the prices, and if the initial bid that comes in is not one that you
I
like,
don't dispute anything you said. I know it's in the statutes, and everything you said is absolutely 100% correct. But what I'm asking is, do you believe the points were awarded honorably for all 3 contractors?
if you do not believe that they are, I mean, you're asking the question, so evidently you feel as though I have to answer, yes, they were, and I say, yes, they were.
That's
There's
all
a
I
question in your mind to the credibility of myself, the auditor, and the safety service director, then just say that you feel that way. Don't ask me if I feel that way. I know what the process took and how we did it. But if you're feeling as though there's something that happened that was illegal, then please speak your mind.
Yeah.
Go ahead and hire an attorney and prosecute us. But we did the process properly.
Yeah, you did do it properly, did it according to the state statutes. That's the only questions I have.
And the only question I had for you, since you were the chairman of the committee in 2012 and 13, was the fact that perhaps if you had been more aware of the qualifications-based selection process, you would have actually supported our methodology and what we did, as opposed to questioning me for an hour at a very intense investigation of the process at the last meeting. At which time, you and the other 2 members of your committee felt satisfactorily that it should be brought before council.
I would add one thing there. That meeting, we had to cut it real quickly because of 7, it was 5 till 7, we had to get into the council meeting. If I'd have had time to think about it a little longer, I'd have called for a second meeting to go deeper into a lot of things, which I was unable to do due to my being a little slow stepping on the gas pedal. But you did answer my questions very well to me.
Okay, well,
Thank
I
you.
appreciate that. I
Thank you.
certainly am happy to answer any questions anytime for anyone.
Mr. Cushman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Mayor, I haven't had a chance to see this. RFQ evaluation is the title of the document. But my questions are this. You said architects, engineers, surveyors came up with this format?
Yeah, it's in their brochure that says how to comply with the qualifications-based process. We simply copied what's on page 10 and
Okay.
used it
Tha-
for our
Did they
criteria.
also weight them the way they are on this page?
They allow you to weight them in any fashion that you choose
Okay,
to.
so the weighting was done by us,
Yes.
okay.
And it was established, I think, primarily by the way it was done by the utilities.
Okay, I want to say right now, I don't think any wrongdoing is done by anybody. My only question is, why would we weight proximity to project site and past performance? Actually, they're the only ones that are weighted. Why just those two? To me, as I'm
It's-
evaluating a bid, I want to know what their background on similar projects are, and I want to know what their price is, and that's what I would weight, not
Yeah.
necessarily how
Yeah,
close they are to the
The
job
price
site.
is the issue that you would always like to have, but under the process that's at hand, it's not possible. The only way to actually find out what the prices are from other qualified engineers that have been rated is to simply say, regardless of what you get from the highest score, you're going to ignore that, you're going to go to number 2. And that would be detrimental to the process. Or I'm going to go ahead and eliminate number 2 and go to number 3, and then I'm not going to negotiate with number 4, I'm going to go to number 5. So I believe the utility department had 11 different qualifications come in for their job in 2012. They negotiated with the top one and awarded the contract to number 1.
I see. In my business, if I don't spread some of the work that I have around to the vendors who are vying for my business, I'm in danger of allowing one vendor to have monopoly over me. And I'm concerned that, again, not that there's anything that's being done wrong, that's not my insinuation, but I am concerned that because we weight proximity to project site and past performance for the city, that we've set up a scenario where if you've done work for Salem and you're located in Salem, you're probably going to get these contracts going forward. And I just wonder if we shouldn't wait or take those weights down to a 1 like everything else, or
It's
weight
possible
altogether.
that you would be negotiated with first, and then if the pricing that you've given to the city isn't commensurate with the complexity of the project, or established with pricing, I mean, if it were 20% of the total cost, then you would simply say no.
Mhm.
But engineers and architects seem to be happy with the process. Most of the time, you're going to find that the highest scoring group is negotiated with and will come down in price, especially if you pound your foot on the floor like I did, and like we did. We discussed the project and we decided that we weren't going to accept the original price, and we were actually able to lower the price.
Right,
which
and you did a
cannot do
fantastic
in a
job.
bid.
Are the other 2 firms, are they aware of the weighting that's done, the weighted process? Do they
Yes,
see these?
No, they did not.
Because if I'm
see
them and I know there's an engineering firm right here in Salem, why waste my time? I'm not even gonna be
Well,
taking
that's a
serious.
good question. Believe me, rather than having to go through this, I wish they'd throw this out and we go out for bids. But we complied with the process that is at hand. We did it to the best of our ability. I'm sure that if Betty were here, she would say so, and Ken and I. We did the best job we could for the city, and we feel as though it was properly done.
Mhm.
If you weighted it less, the local firm would still have more points than the one that wasn't local. So unless you actually threw those 2 questions out, I don't know how you wouldn't have somebody who did work for the city be one that you would rate higher. It happens all across Ohio. It's the same process that's followed. I guess the question has to be, did the committee negotiate a price that was satisfactory? And that's the question, and I believe we did. From historical evidence I've seen, from quotes that we've had in the past, we felt we had an honorable quote and an honorable engineering company to proceed.
I believe that you're right in saying that. I would also just add, it'd be nice to have everybody on the same level playing field when it comes to submitting their quotations and weighting them.
It's something that you could call your state legislator for and have him change the process. Change it to a bidding process. I would have been happy to have the ordinance that was pulled last fall that stated we were gonna advertise for quotes be the way we did it. But I think it may have even been a tap on my shoulder from the utilities telling me at the time that this is going to lead us down a path of litigation. And the law director agreed. That's why he announced that we were going to pull that at the last meeting in December. Had the last meeting in December not been tabled, we would have probably gone through this process before the first of the year. But council adjourned the second meeting in December. We were in the process of going through this request for qualifications and the scoring system. Not having had a project this large in the city before is also probably, at least from the city side. Now, the utility department certainly has projects that are in excess of $50,000 in engineering from time to time. So they were able to actually go through this process and make the corrections and guide us. So this is the first time we've had to do this. We followed an example that we had. We felt we did a proper job, and I'd like to get started on this. We told the voters we were going to get moving, and we haven't got off dead center yet. So I'm sorry that the qualifications-based process is the way we have to do it. Law Director, have we followed the process properly? I've talked to the ACEC. I've explained to them. I've given them information. I've talked to other engineers, and I would
I
like
might
to
only
move forward.
suggest we reconsider weighting, the way we weight them, because you said that's the only thing that you're allowed to control.
The next, obviously, this isn't the whole project. The amount of money we're going to collect is hopefully well over $6 million, and this portion of it is going to be about 2.7 million of the 3.2. So we're still looking at lots more to be done for the community. I'm going to let council decide who's going to do this scoring. We're going to stay out of it this time. The select committee was going to be developed after we did this first wave of paving. You guys on council can determine how you're going to do this qualifications-based process. You're going to do the interviews. You're going to do the bidding, and please leave the mayor and the service director and the auditor out of the process. So you can have at it the next time. But we feel we did it properly.
Okay. Mr. Nestor.
I just want to point out that if you took those 2 points out, proximity to the city and past performance with the city, that there'd be a tie between Howells and Baird and another firm.
They're all
So-
qualified. They're
I know,
all
so
engineers
we
of
don't,
high
we don't,
quality.
the thing, what I'm more concerned with, and what I'd find more interesting, is there a scope of work and a budget put together already for the project? Because if the scope of work and the budget don't match, then you go to the second person on the list and say, we need a bid from you.
When we advertised,
So it's,
and
I
I'm
mean, the
not sure,
qualification, I don't have any problems with choosing.
did you
who
get a
was chosen.
copy of,
I did,
okay.
but now we have a price. So we have a
Yes,
price
but we
that,
advertised how much the scope of the project, we said total project budget, 2.7 million, source of funding and note, project schedule, anticipated dates for design startup completion, December 2015, February 2015, which is passed.
but what I'm more interested in is, like, when I do a proposal for a client, I'll have, here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do this. It's gonna take me about this many hours, and it's gonna cost about this much. So
Certainly,
that's the scope of work in the budget.
certainly.
So we know Howells and Baird, we know they do good work. This is a big project, it has a big number. It shouldn't just be a percentage applied to the overall cost. There
Yeah,
should be a
see,
match
you
between.
can't even do percentage. You can come up with a percentage after you get a quote to justify it based on previous experience, but you can't ask for a percentage-based.
No, I know that.
bid.
I know, but that's, if the concern is, and I'm not even saying I have that concern, but if the concern is that we think that the price offered by the number one firm by qualifications is too high, given the amount of work there is to do, then we just go to the second one, who would have tied if we took those 2 points out anyhow. Now, if we go to the second one and they come in and they're $50,000 higher than Howells and Baird, well, then we know
You're not permitted to go back up to the top. You gotta keep going down, you keep going down, down, down. You can't just say, well, now I found a quote that was
Right.
cheaper, because it might be number 3. It might be number 9 that has the
Right.
lowest quote. What the qualifications-based program states, and this is the tough one. Give me a second to find the section here.
Mr. President.
It says that you should agree upon compensation which is fair and reasonable, taking into account the estimated value, scope, complexity, and nature of the services. Not the lowest bid, not the lowest price. Is the compensation fair and reasonable? And that's what we determined as a trio that was fair and reasonable. So we fulfilled the obligations in this. Yes, there could be lower prices from other engineers. We're not gonna state that there couldn't have been. But was it fair and reasonable? And we felt it was. It's the same process that the utility department used. They got their quote, and they negotiated, and they felt they had a fair and reasonable price, and stopped at number 1 out of 11.
But
So-
I'm not arguing with that at all. I'm just saying that what I haven't seen yet, and I'm okay with going ahead and saying, look, let's get a contract going, let's get moving. You know, it's just that the next step would be, okay, we've selected an engineering firm. Now they should be giving us a proposal that includes not just the price, but the scope of work, which says things like, we're gonna develop the request for quotes or the request for proposals from the paving companies. We're gonna go through the scoring process. We're gonna help in the selection process. We're gonna survey X number of streets. We're gonna, oversee the work. We're gonna measure it in quality control. We're gonna this, we're gonna that. And that's what I don't know exists yet.
That's in the contract.
It is in the contract?
Yes.
Okay, so that's the part that I haven't seen, and I would,
Yeah, the scope
it's-
of work detailed, and this is not just for the design, it's actually for preparing the bid package and construction observation. And in many instances, when you're dealing with federal agencies and state agencies, you have to separate the two. You can award design to one firm and construction review and observation to another. You have to do that. In this case, since it's local, it isn't necessary to do that. Generally speaking, when you get into a state-level job or a federal-level job, there's all kinds of other regulations that have to be met, wage scales. It just becomes a lot more complex, and the cost of engineering goes up. Here on the local level, since we're doing this without any state funding, we're getting a lot better price than normal circumstances would dictate from using any state or federal money. In the 2 programs that you on the Finance Committee, along with a couple other members here, still are on council, approved the programs for small cities projects, and we applied for those. The total cost for those engineerings were estimated at, and I think I mentioned to Cindy it was 24%. It was actually 18%. So 18% is what you could expect engineering costs for design and construction observation and preparing the bid package for statewide jobs. I think that would probably be a pretty good average. Less than 8%, when I read the criteria, I said, this is compensation fair and reasonable. The original price wasn't. And so we determined that it was. We all agreed that it was fair and reasonable at that point, so.
Mr. Brown, wait a minute. Mrs. Dickey has the floor next.
I just want to say, because I was one of the people who said no last time to going ahead and passing it right through, because I needed to really do a lot of my homework and get my mind around what we were doing, because we all stood up here and told the public when they voted on this that we would make sure it was done right. And this is the largest financial project that I've come across since I've been on council. So I take that very seriously, and I've done a lot of work in the last 2 weeks to look at this, look at the Ohio Revised Code, look at the qualifications that were set down. I think that there was nothing wrong with the way it was done. I think that the process does give weight to local businesses here and businesses you've had do work with you before. And I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with that. I really believe in keeping business local. If you have a company that's done a good job for you, if you've had a company that's performed well, you've had no problems with them, I like the fact that we're keeping that business local. I do think the qualification system is weighted to do that. And if that's what we want to do, that's a really good system to do that. And I agree with Mr. Cushman. I don't know why outside companies would even bid unless they can really prove that they're so wonderful.
All engineers don't do a wonderful job. I think the selection that we made is for a group of people that do a fantastic job for this city. So it's possible that other communities that have engineers in residence don't find that to be the case. I have yet to find where anything that has been done for us, for the city. Now, I can't speak for other individuals out there. Hasn't been done of the utmost quality from that firm. They, for example, did not bid on the utility department contract because they're not into the sanitary side of engineering work or the scope of work. So they did not, as a local company, bid on the utility department contract for $2.8 million of work back in 2012. They focus on what they do best, and this is it. I've talked to the paving contractors, and this was after the process took place. They just think that the plans that are provided by Howes and Baird Engineering are without a doubt the best that they get. They cover everything so that someone that's bidding the contract doesn't have add-ons and specials and change orders. Everything is covered. Very little is left to doubt. They're very thorough. So it only reinforced my position that we made the proper selection. And we all talked about the big projects that we have here in town, and we want to see local contractors being used, but whenever the subs are selected, they always seem to be from other towns.
The one thing that I did question was, because if I were Mrs. Brothers sitting there trying to do those qualifications, I would have found that very difficult. I looked at what they were. And when it talks about past performance, and these other places had never had a past performance with us, how can you even rate them at all? And so then they get a 0, and they're already 5 points behind. But some of them did get a point, and it was like, where'd that come from? They didn't perform with us before. It kind of helped them, but
Please call
I don't understand it.
Representative Ginter or anyone else and ask to have this defined more fully.
Exactly, I think it's
Now,
kind of
I asked the American Council of Engineers, Don Bader, I said, we did get one of the quotes in, or one of the qualifications, and they gave us examples of past projects. It basically told us what the prices were going to be on our project. Why would they put in that they did construction observation for 8% and 6% for another project? Why would they do that if they didn't expect us to see that and feel that probably was where they were going to come in? I asked Mr. Bader if he felt that was proper. He said it may be a loophole we're going to have to plug up. Why would they knew it was a $3 million project, or $2.7 million at the time. That's what we put in the paper. So they selected projects that they'd done at similar value and put the prices in that they charged. I didn't ask them for a bid, but they basically gave it to us.
right. Well, that's the other question I had is, before doing this contract, did we go out and benchmark what other places were paying for these types of projects so we would know, based on history of other projects of this size, since we haven't done them, about what that was going to cost?
Pretty much went with past history here in town. The project that they did when they did North Cunningham Bentley Road Extension, it was a 3-pronged project back in 2007, also was around that 8% figure. The dollars may have been less because it was 7 years ago or 8 years ago now, but in that process, it wasn't even selecting, or it wasn't approving a contract, it was approving the contracting of the engineering. It wasn't, the actual ordinance that you have is to approve the contract. That one was just approving the service director's ability to go out and get engineering services for Cunningham Road, for Bentley, and the Pershing Street extension, the initial phase of it. So things have come a long way since then. Now, I don't think in 2007 that this was in existence. Must not have been, because I don't think this has ever been done before, except by utilities. So we've had our first crack at it. Right, wrong, or indifferent, I feel the taxpayers are getting the bang for their buck in the engineer. You save a lot of money by having quality work put out, and according to at least one contractor, they feel that the specifications that they receive from Howes and Barrett are without question better than anything that they get from any other contractors or any other packages, so. And that was
Thank
after the
you.
fact, not before.
Mr.
I
Brown?
just have a very, very quick comment, then I have nothing else for the mayor, but we stand about 1 point for proximity, 1 for past performance. If you look at the bottom of the form, and I don't think anybody out here has one, it says, if you put down a 1, it means poor. Number 2, fair, 3, good, 4, excellent, and 5, superior. Well, there's a 50 to 60 point, the other 2 firms got 50 to 60 points lower than Howes and Barrett, and it all comes down when you take the factor into consideration. 5 times 2 is 10, 4 times 3 is 12. Don't take long to make a big difference there between those 2 items. I know we can't change this, but I wanted to point that out, that this system is entirely unfair to 2 guys that really want to do the business. They took the time to fill out qualification forms and let you know what they felt was they justified for points. But it just isn't fair, but I understand it was done properly, okay? The other thing I have, and this is it, the copy of the legal notice that the mayor mentioned, very, very detailed. It says to notify Mr. Kentz, if you want to apply, you have to send this information in. There were 3 different firms on these forms. Did anybody else even send you anything?
No, we checked the Builders Exchange, and Ken, how many other engineers were there, like?
Beg your pardon?
4, how many? 4. There were 4 other engineers that picked up and clicked on the Builders Exchange for this particular project, but chose not to send in their
They didn't give
their
you enough information.
qualifications. They didn't send in the
Thank you. That answers my
solicitation
question.
for qualifications. I don't know what compels engineers to send this out, send out their qualifications. It seems to me if you're local, you would want to send it out if for no other reason to be on record as having sent it in.
This was in Farm and Dairy. Did we put it in any other media?
Farm and Dairy is picked up by those organizations that cull information that is pertinent to whatever type of work that you do, whether it's concrete work or asphalt work or engineering work. They are advertised in other, so once you get it into the media, regardless of what media you use, it's picked up by other exchanges.
Very good, thank you.
Builders Exchange, Dodge Report, things like that, so.
That takes care of me.
Any other questions for?
It surprised me we only had 3. Sorry, that's all we had.
Mayor, you don't have to elaborate. Any other questions for the mayor? All right. Thank you. Move on to Law Director, Attorney Zellers.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have nothing this evening.
Any questions, Mr. Brown?
Yes, I just have 2 questions that can be answered very, very easily, I hope. As everybody knows, on January 19th, I declined to read the resolution number 3 because it had not gone through my committee. However, on January 27th, I received an email from you giving council an amended version of resolution 3. You claimed you used the wrong word, quotes, meaning bids, instead of a qualification by mistakes. You noted that you didn't want some confusion that the mayor asked for quotes. The original tabled resolution was number 3. The amended tabled resolution is still number 3, although you made an amendment. My questions were as following. I'd like to know who discovered the wording mistake 8 days after legal legislation had already gone to council. Also, where does it say in Robert's rules that you have the authority to amend or change the words in an ordinance without council approval?
Well, Mr. Brown, I think it was the mayor that notified me that
That's fine.
that I used the wrong
That's fine.
word, and I think I explained that pretty well. When I dictated it, I said RFQ. In my private practice, that would mean request for quotes. So I think my secretary misunderstood that, and I didn't catch it until he did.
But you're responsible for anything the secretary does, of course, but do you have that authority to amend something without going to council first before it comes to you? Even though there was a mistake in there?
Well, it was a clerical error, Mr. Brown, not a substantive error.
I'm going by what was on the document that was presented to me on the 19th. Those words are in there, although I know differently now. But do you have the authority, though, to do that, to amend it without going to council?
When it's a clerical error, yeah, I do.
I don't know about that, but
Yeah.
I won't argue the point. Thank you very much.
Mr. Gall?
Mr. Zellers, I have in front of me the standard form of agreement between the City of Salem and Howes and Baird for professional services for the 2016 citywide paving project. So the point is, the contract has already been submitted and you've had a chance to review it, correct?
I have.
And during prior conversations, I've asked if there's a possibility that when we deal with times, for example, furnish 2 review copies of the preliminary designs within 75 calendar days, to furnish design phase documents within 14 calendar days. The requirement is there, but I see no penalty if the requirement is not met. And we've talked about penalty clauses, and the Utilities Commission has had issues in the past with professional design services that have stated they're going to do something within a particular time. And I'm just asking if you've had the opportunity yet to review my previous request that we insert a penalty clause in this contract.
Mr. Gall, I have not. When I had reviewed that contract before you had raised that issue with me, based on the situation with this ordinance being tabled and what have you, I have not reviewed it again, nor have I approached that. Now, keep in mind that this would allow, this ordinance or resolution would only authorize the mayor to enter into the contract with them. It doesn't mean that the language of that contract couldn't be adjusted in that regard. I certainly recall the issues with the utility department where we've had those problems before with moving an engineer along. And that's something that I think could be discussed with Howes and Baird. I don't think that they would have a problem with it. It doesn't necessarily affect the cost of the contract for them. I think they have typically met their burden of schedules in the past, and I don't know why they wouldn't anticipate doing the same in this regard, so.
And I appreciate that. Unfortunately, we're looking as we have a pro forma standard form of an agreement that's pre-typed and already everything's done except putting in a couple of days where there's a blank line.
Mhm.
But we certainly have the authority to add a penalty clause, not only in this professional agreement, but anyone that we might deal with the city, so we don't run through issues in the past in which timeliness becomes a very important point, particularly not here because we're not dealing with it, but there's times in the past in which we have almost lost grants because we can't get the professional design done in time. I'm just asking that when you review this and once this ordinance passes, that's an area of concern to you when you review it again, please.
And I think that's a valid point, Mr. Gall. We always have it in our contracts with the service providers.
Sure.
But, you know, engineering services is another type of service, and I don't think that it's inappropriate, and I don't believe that Howes and Baird would, but I have not had any contact with them regarding that.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the law director? Seeing none, thank you. The auditor, Mrs. Brothers, had contacted me about an hour before the meeting and indicated that she was dealing with a family health issue. So she apologizes for not being able to be here this evening, but wanted everybody to know that there was an issue keeping her from here. Move on then to Treasurer, Dr. Conrad.
I don't have any report, President, Attorney Apple. Thank you.
Any questions for the treasurer? Seeing none, thank you. Safety Service Director, Mr. Kent.
Mr. President, I have no report this evening.
Mr. Brown.
Yes. Can you use the podium, sir? I can't turn my head. Thank you. I keep it very, very, very slim, very, very short here. I'm getting a headache anyways. I'm I'm gonna ask you, to ask the mayor, did you give a lot of thought and consideration when you awarded points to the three firms?
Yes, I did.
Okay, well, you gave 1 point for experience, past performance in the city to DOZ Engineering and also Matthew Benza. The 1 point translates into poor quality. Were you aware when you did those forms that neither firm had done business in Salem before, but you gave them 1 point?
Yes, I was.
Why did you give them 1 point?
That was my choice.
Well, that's the purpose of those forms, is to do this properly. I don't, is that properly? You give them 1 point, they've never done business here?
In my mind, it was.
Was the way to do these forms explained before the meeting?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
With the way, the steps to take in filling out these forms, were they explained prior to filling out the forms?
Between the three of us?
Yeah, were they
Yes.
explained?
Yes.
Then how do you explain giving somebody 1 point that's never done business here?
That was my choice.
Wow. Never done business, okay. That's all I have, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Kent? Utilities, Mr. Weingart.
Mr. Chairman, Council, Honorable Mayor, I have no offer or anything this evening, but just to say that the commission will meet on Thursday, February 22nd, and the first meeting will start at 2 p.m.
Any questions for Mr. Weingart? Thank you. That concludes the report of city officials. Move on to report of standing committees. Finance, Mr. Cushman.
Thank you, Mr. President. My committee has not met. I have no formal report this evening.
Thank you. Streets, alleys, and sidewalks, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. President. I understand Mrs. Brothers isn't here. I did have some questions that would be relevant to passing this ordinance tonight, but I can save what I want with time for me to talk later. Thank you.
Thank you. Utilities, Mr. Gall.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have not met, and I do not have a formal report this evening.
Traffic and safety, Mr. Whitehill.
Thank you, Mr. President. We've not met. I have no report.
Rules and ordinances, Mrs. Dickey.
My committee met prior to this meeting at 6 p.m. All members were present. The first issue was front yard parking. 1199.04 was tabled to question the language in what is a lot and why are garages being included in this. 1125.16 was tabled for further definition. Ordinance 351.16 was discussed, and we deleted when necessary to avoid conflict with other traffic or from that ordinance, so that it only says that you can park in the yards if the police are directing you to do so.
That's in subsection A.
Yes. A motion was made by Mr. Gall, second by Mr. Brown. It passed 3-0 to bring it to council this evening. On 1199.04, we discussed adding ODOT items shall be of the latest types, so that we don't have to keep coming back to revise this, but that is being tabled for this evening. Also, specifications set forth in the current State of Ohio Department of Transportation Manual to be added to 1125.16. Then we discussed ordinance 353 regarding parking meters. We've not had parking meters for years in the city. We want to delete those ordinances entirely, and that will be for another meeting here for council. But we did have a motion to delete those by Mr. Gall, second by Mr. Brown, passed 3-0, and those will be sent to bring something formal through the law director. We then discussed 355, which refers to parking control officers, which I believe were only used for the parking meter and parking ordinances downtown, but we voted to look into the uses of these ordinances for future meetings, because there might be other reasons for a control officer in the future. Also, there was an ordinance in that section of 355 talking about how long you can park in a parking place. The limit now is 3 hours, and we discussed whether or not we wanted to keep that, and we decided we did. Lastly, we discussed 1117.09, which is street lighting. We voted to send that to council, after it's drafted, to add 1117.09B and 1117.10, which requires galvanized traffic light poles painted black, and also the mast arms in the downtown area, so we don't get into a problem like we had last year where they deteriorated and were a safety issue. And we adjourn the meeting at 6:37 PM. Thank you.
So we just have the ordinance dealing with 351.16.
Yes,
All right, that will be number 10.
thank you.
Parks, Mr. Paparotis.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have no report.
Okay. Economic Development, Mr. Nestic.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have no report at this time.
All right. Committee of the Whole, Mr. Nestic.
The committee of the whole has not met. I have no report, however, I have 3 resolutions to read tonight.
All right, the first commending Jeff Hughes will be number 13. The next commending William Hayward will be number 14. And the resolution commending James Wooding will be number 15.
Thank you.
Mr. President, I apologize. Have we received those? Nobody on this side has.
With that, I don't know if.
They're in your
this is-
email.
They were,
I have copies in my email from
All
Mr.
right.
Zellers.
they were emailed from the law director.
When did you send those? Nobody
don't
here
know.
has, them. That's why we're asking.
I did, my secretary indicated,
Friday
I
the
just
12th.
returned from the Dominican
I have
Republic
them.
last
I
night.
received them.
I
So,
have them.
Yeah, I have them.
She told me they were sent.
Friday the 12th.
February 12th at 4:15 PM.
I apologize. I did not receive it. It's my fault.
That concludes the report of standing committees. We'll move on to the second and third reading of ordinances and resolutions. Resolution number 3, Mr. Brown.
Thank you very much. I'm having a very tough time deciding what to do, but I did have one very important question to ask Mrs. Brothers. She's not here. If I can be allowed to read that one question I was going to ask, I will continue to
That's fine if you want to at this point in
do what I
time.
have to do. May I ask that question?
Yes, you may.
Thank you very so much, sir. Mrs. Brothers, under firm data, she assigned Michael Bivens a 1 point, meaning poor. Under firm's data, as far as how many years have you been in business? She left that blank. Under the one I'm a little bit shook up over this mess. But she did award Michael Benz a 1 point, which translates to poor, for both items that Mr. Kent's also gave 1 point for, poor past performance. But like I started to say before I stammered her a bit, she left one blank, didn't put anything in, just a little dash in it, and that was worth 5 points, up to 5 points. She left it blank. My decision here is I'm not happy the way these forms are filled out. I've been told they were done with integrity, but I'm finding mistakes paid by our service director and Mrs. Brothers, leaving a blank, giving points when there shouldn't be points given. If I had a brain at all, I'd say let's table this again. I'm strongly considering that, to have this go back to Committee of the Whole to discuss this at a Committee of the Whole. I can't ask for a vote on whether I should do that or not. It's my decision. But I feel that if we're doing our job right to the people, we're talking $3 million. We're awarding a contract for about roughly 10% of that for a contract to do the engineering. And we promised the people we'd do this right from day one. Chairman of the Street Sidewalks and Alleys Committee, I am not a happy camper. I'm going to ask for, making a motion to table this so we can have a meeting of the Committee of the Whole to make an overall discussion on this. I'm making the motion. Do I have a second?
Does he need a second on that?
You would.
May I ask what the motion again was? I'm sorry. Are we transferring this to the Committee of the Whole? Is that what you're requesting? Or
Yes.
back to sidewalks and alleys?
No, I want to transfer the discussion to the Committee of the Whole. I think we're missing some points here, and I can't sleep with myself tonight if I put this up for a vote. If I have to, I will.
Wouldn't be a vote tonight. Could always give it a second reading.
Beg your pardon?
Wouldn't have to vote tonight, could always give it a second reading, there's no vote taken.
Okay. I
Just
would
wanted
like
to clarify that point.
I follow you. Any other comments?
Is there a second from anyone?
Okay.
Motion dies for lack of a second.
I would like, okay. I would like to do two things. I would like to table this and have it to go to committee of the whole for further discussion, because there's too many loopholes in these evaluation forms for me to go any further on.
Well, I thought we covered that with your motion, which there was no second with that, so what the law directors indicated, there need to be a second, so
Then I
that's
make the
not.
motion, we have the second reading this evening.
Can ask for the second reading, we don't need a
Yes.
motion for that. Would the pro tem clerk read resolution number 3 for its second reading this evening by title only?
Being a resolution authorizing the mayor to enter into contract with Howes and Baird, Inc. for engineering services associated with the 2016 citywide paving project and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. All right, ordinance number 4, Mr. Whitehill.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we add the emergency clause to ordinance number 4.
Is there a second on that? Mr. Cushman, would the clerk pro tem please call the roll?
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Mr. Nestick?
Yes.
Mr. Gall?
Yes.
Mr. Paparotis?
Yes.
7 yeas, Mr. President.
All right. The emergency clause will be added with regards to that. With that, do we move to the next reading, or do we have to?
Because it wasn't in this form, I think you would have to suspend council rules now to give it additional reading.
Move to suspend council rules so that ordinance 4 may be given its third reading this
All right.
evening.
Is there a second on that? Mr. Brown? Would the clerk pro tem please call the roll on that?
Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Mr. Gall?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Nestick?
Yes.
Mr. Paparotis?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Oh, yes.
7 yeas, Mr. President.
That passes. Mr. Whitehill?
Thank you, Mr. President. Certainly with respect to the Spencer family as well as the Chambers family, who have spent a lot of time this evening while we covered other business, I'm going to break with a little bit of tradition and ask to read the ordinance in its entirety instead of by title only, because the title will not give the details that I think these folks are looking for. So I'm
Point of order.
Yes.
That's certainly an appropriate motion, but it would require suspension of statutory rules to do that. In Ohio, ordinances are read by title only by statute, so it would require a suspension of statutory rules to allow that to happen.
So we take the second on the motion and do that. Is there a second? Mr. Cushman? The clerk pro tem would call the roll on that, please.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Gall?
Yes.
Mr. Nestick?
Yes.
Mr. Paparotis?
Yes.
7 yeas, Mr. President.
All right, and asking that statutory rules be suspended at this time?
That we just did.
Right.
Didn't we just
With
do-
that, okay.
Yeah.
Very good. Mr. Whitehill?
I move that the clerk pro tem read ordinance 4 in its entirety for passage this evening.
The clerk pro tem would do that, please.
Being an ordinance amending section 505.18 of chapter 505 of the codified ordinances of the city of Salem, Now therefore be it ordained by the Council of the City of Salem, State of Ohio, that Section 505.18 of Chapter 505 of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Salem is hereby amended as follows. Vicious dogs and dangerous dogs. No person shall harbor, keep, or allow purposefully or negligently a vicious dog as defined in Section 505.19 to be inside the city limits at any time. Unless a dangerous dog is lawfully engaged in hunting or training or training for the purpose of hunting and is accompanied by the owner, keeper, harborer, or handler of the dog, no owner, keeper, or harborer of a dangerous dog shall fail to do either of the following. While that dog is on the premises of the owner, keeper, or harborer, securely confine it at all times in a building in a locked pen that has a top, locked fence yard, or other locked enclosure that has a top. While the dog is off premises of the owner, keeper, or harborer, keep that dog on a chain link leash or tether that is not more than 6 feet in length, and additionally do at least one of the following. Keep that dog in a locked pen that has a top, locked fence, yard, or other locked enclosure that has a top. Have the leash or tether controlled by a person who is of suitable age and discretion, or securely attach, tie, or affix the leash to tether to the ground or stationary object or fixture so that the dog is adequately restrained and stationed such a person in close enough proximity to that dog so as to prevent it from causing injury to any person. Muzzle that dog. No owner, keeper, or harborer of a dangerous dog shall fail to do the following. 1. Obtain liability insurance with an insurer authorized to write liability insurance in this state, providing coverage in each occurrence because of damage or bodily injury to or death of a person caused by a dangerous dog. And provide proof of that liability insurance upon request to any law enforcement officer, county dog warden, or public health official charged with enforcing this section. 2. Obtain a dangerous dog registration certificate from the county auditor pursuant to Ohio Revised Code 955.22. Affix a tag that identifies the dog as dangerous dog to the dog's collar and ensure that the dog wears the collar tag at all times. 3. Notify the local dog warden immediately if any of the following occurs. A. The dog is loose or unconfined. B. The dog bites a person unless the dog is on the property of the owner of the dog and the person who is bitten is unlawfully trespassing or committing a criminal act within the boundaries of that property. C. The dog attacks another animal while it is off property of the owner of the dog. 4. If the dog is sold, given to another person, or dies, notify the county auditor within 10 days of the sale, transfer, or death, which is part of Ohio Revised Code 955.22. D. Whoever violates subsection A or B hereof is guilty of a misdemeanor of the 4th degree on a first offense and of a misdemeanor of the 3rd degree on each subsequent offense. Additionally, the court may order the offender to personally supervise the dangerous dog that the offender owns, keeps, or harbors to cause that dog to complete dog obedience training or to do both. And the court may order the offender to obtain liability insurance pursuant to subsection C hereof. The court in the alternative may order the dangerous or vicious dog to be humanely destroyed by a licensed veterinarian, the dog warden, or the Humane Society at the owner's expense. C1. Whoever violates subsection C2 hereof is guilty of a misdemeanor of the 4th degree. Whoever violates subsection C1, 3, or 4 hereof is guilty of a minor misdemeanor.
All right, is there any discussion?
Of course.
Mrs. Dickey.
I would like to make a motion that we amend that to to include dangerous dogs in the language of not being allowed in the city for this reason, for these reasons. Number 1, both of these issues that came before council today could possibly have only deemed these dogs dangerous dogs, which would keep them in the city, even under those restraints, which sound wonderful. But depending on the damage that is determined by this young lady's injuries, that could be a dangerous dog. This one, probably a dangerous dog. That does not help their feeling of safety or their actual safety in this city to allow that dog to stay, because in these cases, these owners did not obey the laws that were already established by this state. and no one is forcing them to do it. And so that dog remains there, one of them without shots and license, the other one just still in the home, probably gonna be doing the same thing because the owner feels it's not an issue. So to put on extra restraints does not mean they're going to obey it, and it does not improve the safety of these citizens. Why would you want to have a dangerous dog living next to you? That dangerous dog is going to hurt someone. It may not kill someone, but it's going to hurt someone. It's just the law of probability. These statutes that were made from the Ohio Revised Code were made to cover the entire state of Ohio. That's people who live in the country, who live in isolated areas, who have hunting dogs, who have all kinds of other situations that we do not have in this city. And to say that we are not going to protect our citizens against dangerous dogs because we're afraid that someone will bring a lawsuit is crazy. A person can bring a lawsuit on every law we make. That's why we have a law director. That's why we have an assistant law director. That's why we have the most attorneys in the county that you can find anywhere, because people can bring lawsuits. But we cannot shirk our duty because we're afraid someone will bring a lawsuit. We are sitting here because we promised the people in our city that we would protect them. We make laws all the time that could be disputed, that are much less serious than this. We need to keep these dangerous dogs out of the city. So I am making a motion, and I hope someone will back me up on this, to keep those dangerous dogs also, not just vicious dogs who have killed someone or permanently damaged someone, out of the city. Thank you.
All right, is there a second with regards to that? Mr. Brown? If the clerk pro tem would call the roll on the motion.
May I ask a question first?
You may.
Is it possible to, and trust me, I'm conflicted on this one, especially after the personal situations we're looking at here. Is it proper point of order if I may ask the law director to elaborate or clarify again when we discuss what we refer to as maybe the legal peril of possibly overreaching? Because there's a valid concern when I'm rereading the definitions. You know, if it's a serious injury, it is very likely that it could be designated as a vicious dog in any of those circumstances that we talked about, the examples, because it was a serious injury. So I want to just defer to the law director if I may before we do that.
I may, thank you.
Attorney Zellers.
Thank you. Following up immediately on that, keeping in mind the designations made by our health department will be based on the totality of the circumstances. So they make the designation. If it's challenged by the owner, then it goes to court. If they don't challenge it, then that designation stays. So if our health department were to designate those dogs in these two situations here as vicious dogs, then they're gone. And I can't speak certainly for the health department. I don't know what their criteria will be, but that would be the end of those dogs. The situation with dangerous dogs, and I certainly understand and sympathize with what Mrs. Dickey is saying, but keep this in mind. If you do add dangerous dogs, you may want to definitely consider changing the definition of a dangerous dog, because at this point, a dangerous dog would be a dog that caused any harm, a dog that may have jumped up on somebody and scratched their arm. They would now be dangerous and they would have to leave the city. A dangerous dog currently would be a dog that ran out of the house 3 times and got away, didn't cause any harm or anything to anybody, but they would now immediately have to leave the city because they had escaped the house 3 times. So that would be the pitfall in adding dangerous dog at this point without changing the definition of dangerous dog in 50519. That is this question that may, and maybe I'm getting back to what you're asking, that may lead to the problems with the overreaching. A person's dog that scratched somebody out of interest and maybe not out of malice would now be subject to having to leave the city based on that injury.
Mrs. Dickey.
I would suggest that we deal with 19 when we get to 19 with the definition. But I do not think that we should leave it up to question whether or not a dangerous dog who injures someone, though not permanently, should be allowed to stay in the city. And I would be fine with dropping the 3 violations part of that definition and just say the injury or anything like that. But I don't want a dangerous dog to stay in the city and cause the kind of emotional turmoil that these families are going through.
Mr. Nestic.
I'd like to see something get passed tonight. And honestly, I think that maybe this can get altered in another meeting and another discussion, but at least let's get something on the books tonight. I mean, if we start making all kinds of changes to this, it calls into question that personally, I haven't been involved with all the discussions that you guys had back and forth in multiple meetings. And I'm not even sure what I'm voting on. I know what this says, and I want to at least get this passed, and then maybe make it better, through subsequent meetings.
Mrs. Dickey.
The problem is, when you pass something, then it gets shelved to a later date and there's no rush, and these dogs are still staying in the city. And if we're gonna put an emergency clause on this, it is urgent, it is emergent. This is something we need to deal with now. We just had one this week while we waited.
Mr. Nestor.
I guess I'm just unclear as to why this doesn't go far enough to address that situation too.
Mr. White.
I would just review also, I mean, this is a significant change. We have not had any designation for vicious at all. We've not required the liability insurance and so forth, or registering of these animals. We've not even had a clear pathway for the health commissioner to make these designations. While I have a very sincere empathy, having my daughter having been bitten by a dog as well, I am concerned that we have not given this a chance to work at all and to see what kind of rulings the health commissioner makes and designations that he makes. I can assure you this issue is not going away. This will not be shelved, but we have not yet even given it a chance to get on the books. And the reason for the emergency clause, well said, the example of the situation where just by having 3 readings, we had incidents, in that time, so.
Mr. Cushman.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a question for the law director regarding this. If an ordinance is passed, is there a period of time it has to sit before the Rules and Ordinances Committee can pick it up?
President?
Mrs. Ellis.
Mr. Cushman, no. If an ordinance is passed by an emergency clause, which has been added already, it would go into effect immediately upon signature of the mayor. So it would come into effect, and then council could review it immediately if they chose to do
Okay.
so. We wouldn't have to wait for any period of time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. It wouldn't be subject to any referendum or anything of that nature, which is the
That's
issue
what I wanted to
typically
know.
of wait.
Thank you.
Mr. Gall.
My problem is, once again, wording. And dangerous dog means a dog without provocation that causes injury, period.
Where are you reading from? Just for
I'm
everybody's
reading
benefit.
from 509.19. Now, my problem is that I don't think a dog that causes injury with no definition of the word injury should be determined to be a dangerous dog. If a dog barks, scratches, hits, bites, whatever, it becomes a dangerous dog, and therefore it's kicked out of the city. So my problem is not with the cause, but again with the wording. We're dealing with 505.19, 1A in the definition of dangerous dog. I think that is exceedingly broad. And therefore, I'm going to oppose the position that is well stated to the lovely lady to my right, but only because of the definition of what a dangerous dog is. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Whitehill.
Point of clarification, and these are the definitions as set by the Ohio Revised Code, is that correct?
That is
So we can just, if we see fit to do so, to clarify the definitions?
We can, and if I may,
Attorney
speaking
Zellers.
to that point, Mr. Gall, that is correct. That's any injury other than serious injury, which is defined in 3A5, excuse me. So it would be any other injury, and that's the pitfall I'm warning about. If a dog, out of his exuberance, were to jump up and scratch you, trying to lick your face, they would not
Mr. Zellers, am I missing something? Is there any place else? And who determines whether or not an injury occurred?
It'd be
Health
the
commissioner.
health commissioner.
In our meeting, the health commissioner stated he receives the police report as well as any kind of medical reports from the medical provider, and then evaluates based on the entire case, if you will.
So if we follow this logically, if the health commissioner, whatever basis he uses, determines an injury has occurred, however broad that is used, we then automatically have a dog that's gonna be kicked out of the city. Is that the logic? Is my logic correct? As it's written? So we're,
Correct.
okay. Thank you.
Any other discussion with regards to this? We have the motion on the floor and a second with regards to adding dangerous dog to, that could be removed from the city.
Can you review that motion? What's it amending?
I would like to add dangerous dogs to dogs that are banned from the city, not just vicious. So,
Yeah, but where is that wording wise?
505.18A.
yeah, 505.18A.
Where it starts with vicious dogs and dangerous dogs.
Very first paragraph.
Excuse me, it will now read?
Well, what she's asking, the motion, it would add, and correct me if I'm wrong, where it goes on to say a vicious dog or
And dangerous
dog.
It would actually, pardon me, Mr. President, it would actually be amending A to include dangerous dogs
Right.
as far as,
Yes.
Correct.
right.
Mr. Nestor.
And just to be clear, the designation of dangerous dogs is up to the health the health department person?
Mr. President, it places I'm the president of the health board, and the initial contact we had was, was regarding an attack on the south side of town. All this has started as a result of that. The health commissioner welcomes the opportunity to be the one to resolve the issue. So he's shouldering an awful lot of responsibility in the determination as to whether or not a dog is vicious or dangerous. He will comply with whatever council approves. There's no question, but he is the last resort he's the first and last resort in the city is to make the decision as to what is a vicious and what is a dangerous dog.
Mr. Nestor.
So then by making this change, we're more or less taking that latitude out of his hands.
No, we're giving it to him.
Well, if we make the change and say a dangerous dog or a vicious dog, both of them are not allowed in the city at all?
That's correct.
Then if someone gets bit and he looks at this and he goes, well, is that a dangerous dog or a vicious dog? It doesn't matter what he says it is,
Well,
it's gone.
it's similar to what the law director said. If the dog jumps up and you have shorts on and he scratches you on the leg with long nails, he's caused injury. And under the circumstances that that are being debated here is whether or not that injury constitutes a dangerous dog and has to be taken out of the city. He has caused injury, so it removes the latitude for him to determine whether or not that injury was sufficient to be taken out of the city.
Yep.
So,
If dangerous dog gets added in, you are correct. Dog jumps up and scratches somebody, he has no
Out of town.
latitude, gone. As far as when we move on to 505.19, because things could be redefined there with regards to that. They don't have to be, just say they could be with regards to it.
And I would make a motion to redefine that.
Well,
yeah,
we'll
other than
get to
scratch.
that at the,
Yeah, caused injury other than a scratch.
Serious injury,
There you go.
because it says permanent serious in the vicious.
any further discussion on ordinance number 4? Go back to, we have the motion with a second that's on the floor to add dangerous dog in subsection A at the beginning of that. clerk pro tem call the roll with regards to that, please?
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Gall?
No.
Mr. Cushman?
No.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Nestick?
No.
Mr. Paparotis?
No.
Mr. Whitehill, no.
Right. Motion fails. Is there any further discussion then as to the motion as it is?
Yes, sir. Mr. President,
Mr. Whitehill?
I would suggest that we, if it's within legal statutes, that we clearly define, to Mr. Gall's point and to Mrs. Dickey's point, that we clearly define the definitions of serious injury, if that is something that we can then visit. I think that would help that clarification, to avoid the scratch ejection, but to certainly make sure that situations like what we've talked about would classify correctly under serious injury.
You're saying at a later point in time?
At a later point, under definitions or a subsequent meeting.
Any further discussion as to ordinance number 4? And you were asking for all 3 readings, correct?
This is the third reading.
Third reading, all right. If the clerk pro tem would please call the roll on ordinance number 4 for passage this evening.
Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Gall?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Paparotis?
Yes.
Mr. Nestick?
Yes.
7 yeas, Mr. President.
All right. Ordinance number 4 passes. Mr. Whitehill.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Law Director, point of order, if I may. I need to, in order to read it by title only, it was council rules, is that correct? I need to suspend?
Because you're adding emergency?
Actually, yeah, I need to do that first. Motion to add the emergency clause.
That's swear on that.
Emergency clause, no. We'll just take majority.
All right. Is there a second on that? Mrs. Dickey? If the clerk pro tem would call the roll on that.
Mr. Nestick?
Yes.
Mr. Gall?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Paparotis?
Yes.
7 yeas, Mr. President.
All right, that passes. Mr. Whitehill.
Mr. President, I move to suspend council rules so that ordinance 5 may be read in its entirety. Is that correct?
Point of order? Thank
Yes.
you. Now we would need council rules suspended because of the modification to the ordinance, adding the emergency clause. So we would have to suspend council rules so it could be read in this form as opposed to the form it was previously. Okay?
That's why suspending council.
Council for that.
Right.
And then it will be statutory to read entirely.
Okay.
All right, is there a second on that? Mr. Cushman? Clerk pro tem would call the roll with that, please.
Mr. Paparotis?
Yes.
Mr. Nestick?
Yes.
Mr. Gall?
Yes.
Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
7 yeas, Mr. President.
Thank you. Mr. Whitehill?
Statutory rules? No.
Yes.
Move to suspend statutory rules so that ordinance 5 may be read in its entirety.
All right, is there Mrs. Dickey with the second? The clerk pro tem would call the roll with that, please.
Mr. Nestick?
Yes.
Mr. Paparotis?
Yes.
Mr. Gall?
Yes.
Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
7 yeas, Mr. President.
Right, if the clerk pro tem would then read ordinance number 5 in its entirety at this time, please.
Being an ordinance creating and adopting section 505.19 of chapter 505 of the codified ordinances of the city of Salem. Now therefore be it ordained by the council of the city of Salem, state of Ohio, section 1.
Excuse me, point of order.
And declaring an emergency.
Oops, sorry, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you.
I had it noted but didn't read it. Now therefore be it ordained by the council of the city of Salem, state of Ohio, section 1, that section 505.19 of chapter 505 of the codified ordinances of the city of Salem is hereby created and adopted as follows. 505.19, definition, dog designations and transfer of ownership certificates. A, as used in this section, 1A, dangerous dog means a dog that, without provocation and subject to division of this section, has done any of the following. 1, caused injury other than killing or serious injury to any person. 2, killed another dog. 3, been the subject of a third or subsequent violation of section 505.01. B, dangerous dog does not include a police dog that has caused injury other than killing or serious injury to any person or has killed another dog while the police dog is being used to assist one or more law enforcement officers in the performance of their official duties. 2, menacing fashion means that a dog would cause any person being chased or approached to reasonably believe that the dog will cause physical injury to that person. 3A, nuisance dog means a dog that without provocation and while off the premises of its owner, keeper, or harborer has chased or approached a person in either a menacing fashion or an apparent attitude of attack, or has attempted to bite or otherwise endanger any person, subject to Division A 3B of this section. B, nuisance dog does not include a police dog that while being used to assist one or more law enforcement officers in the performance of official duties has chased or approached a person in either a menacing fashion or an apparent attitude of attack, or has attempted to bite or otherwise endanger any person. Police dog means a dog that has been trained and may be used to assist one or more law enforcement officers in the performance of their official duties. 5, serious injury means any of the following. Any physical harm that carries a substantial risk of death. Any physical harm that involves a permanent incapacity, whether partial or total, or a temporary substantial incapacity. C, any physical harm that involves a permanent disfigurement or a temporary serious disfigurement. D, any physical harm that involves acute pain of a duration that results in substantial suffering or any degree of prolonged or intractable pain. 6A, vicious dog means a dog that without provocation and subject to Division A 6B of this section has killed or caused serious injury to any person. B, vicious dog does not include either of the following. A police dog that has killed or caused serious injury to any person while the police dog is being used to assist one or more law enforcement officers in the performance of their official duties. A dog that has killed or caused serious injury to any person while a person was committing or attempting to commit a trespass or other criminal offense on the property of the owner, keeper, or harborer of the dog. 7, without provocation means that a dog was not teased, tormented, or abused by a person, or that the dog was not coming to the aid or the defense of a person who was not engaged in illegal or criminal activity and who was not using the dog as a means of carrying on such activity. B, upon the transfer of ownership of any dog, the seller of the dog shall give the buyer a transfer of ownership certificate that shall be signed by the seller. The certificate shall contain the registration number of the dog, the name of the seller, and a brief description of the dog. Blank forms of the certificate may be obtained from the county auditor. The transfer of ownership shall be recorded by the auditor upon presentation of a transfer of ownership certificate that is signed by the former owner of the dog and that is accompanied by any required fee. Prior to the transfer of ownership or possession of any dog upon the buyer's or the transferee's request, the seller or other transferor of the dog shall give to the person a written notice relative to the behavior and propensities of the dog. D, within 10 days after the transfer of ownership or possession of any dog, if the seller or other transferor of the dog has knowledge that the dog is a dangerous dog, the seller or other transferor shall give to the buyer or other transferee, the Board of Health for the district in which the buyer or other transferee resides, and the dog warden of the county in which the buyer or the other transferee resides, a completed copy of with a written form on which the seller shall furnish the following information. 1, the name and address of the buyer or other transferee of the dog. 2, the age, sex, color, breed, and current registration number of the dog. In addition, the seller shall answer the following questions, which shall be specifically stated on the form as follows. Has the dog ever chased or attempted to attack or bite a person? If yes, describe the incident in which the behavior occurred. Has the dog ever bitten a person? If yes, describe the incident in which the behavior occurred. Has the dog ever seriously injured or killed a person? If yes, describe the incident in which the behavior occurred. The dog warden of the county in which the seller resides shall furnish the form to the seller at no cost. E, no seller or other transferor of a dog shall fail to comply with the applicable requirements of divisions B to D of this section. Whoever violates subsections B or D of this section is guilty of a minor misdemeanor.
Is there any discussion? Mrs. Dickey?
I would make a motion to amend the definition of dangerous dog to include injury committed during a menacing act by the dog, instead of just injury other than killing or permanent serious injury.
Mr. Attorney Zeller?
Thank you. We don't have a definition of menacing act unless you're referring to menacing fashion.
We do have that in the nuisance dog definition, menacing.
Well, we have a definition of menacing fashion,
Yes.
A2.
Mhm.
But that's just if the dog
Well,
is,
we use the term menacing on below, so that has to be defined.
it is defined in A2. Menacing fashion.
But that would take care of the argument that if it just jumped up on you and scratched you, that's not a menacing act.
I guess the point of order is I'm concerned about using the word menacing, the words menacing act, because we don't have a definition of menacing act.
When we say menacing fashion,
Okay.
we do have that.
Mr. President. That was to be added to vicious or dangerous?
Dangerous.
Let me just make sure I have it clear. You're asking in your motion for what again?
I'd like to make a motion, instead of just saying injury to the definition of dangerous dog, to say injury committed during a menacing act by the dog, for two reasons. Number one, that defines clearly what a dangerous dog is. It also doesn't take a dog like mine, who's as friendly as can be, who might jump up on you when you come in the door so it can lick you to death, from becoming a dangerous dog.
Attorney Zellers, I believe you raised the question as to saying menacing act. We don't have a definition of menacing act, and it would require that.
It would, just for clarification, so that when our health commissioner is making a determination, he would have something to fall back on. I mean, we do have a definition of menacing fashion.
We could make it menacing fashion, because we do have that defined, and it's pretty much the same meaning. Injury committed in a menacing fashion by the dog.
Mr. President.
Mr. Whitehill?
My concern here is that then you don't have a category for any other injury. There is no injury provision under nuisance, am I correct?
Correct.
So I think this is, with respect, I think this is possibly what Mr. Nestick was getting to about the more we do this, whether we lose ground, because as it's stated currently, any injury is an injury, whether it's a menacing act or not. If we make it to where an injury is only during a menacing, then we have to go back and say, well, what if there is the dog scratch, that maybe your opinion is it's a scratch and your neighbor's opinion is it is more than a scratch.
Well, that's gonna be up to the health commissioner to determine
Yeah, but
with
there's
his
no
investigation.
other category for injury, though. It's not under nuisance. So then we have to go to
what other
nuisance and create an injury
But
category.
what other category would make sense? I mean, if the dog isn't doing it in a menacing fashion, it shouldn't be categorized. Any dog
I'm
could
sure.
have a broken toenail and,
But there could still be an injury that was not committed during a menacing act, and we have no provision then for that.
like what?
Playfulness.
But would you want to make a dog a dangerous dog when it's playful?
But what if you were playful and you fell down a flight of steps because the dog jumped up on you to lick you?
So you want to make that a dangerous dog?
No, I'm dumb.
That's what I'm saying, is I could not vote to pass this ordinance when you could have an innocent, playful dog who scratches you become a dangerous dog.
Right.
I think my point is being missed. My point is, there's nothing under nuisance then for that low-level injury. We're leaving a gap, I
Well,
believe.
we could add that, but I'm making a motion to add this to dangerous.
Okay.
All right, motion has been made, is there a second? Mr. Brown? Any further discussion?
Sorry.
Oh, that's all right, go ahead.
I'm just not sure how this is gonna read. How does it read? How do you insert that? How does it read? Because menacing fashion doesn't describe an act.
Like going through the throat or something.
A1I, caused injury committed during a menacing act,
You can't say act.
committed in a menacing fashion by the dog, other than killing or serious injury to any person.
Mr. President,
Mr. Gall?
I understand what we're saying, but we're going the wrong way. We have actually reduced an injury to something that has occurred in a menacing fashion. And menacing fashion is based on belief. And if you open the door to belief, anything is possible. Even though I'm not a good Catholic, Mr. President. I'm indicating that the attempt is correct, but caused injury is greater. It gives more leeway to the health commissioner to make a determination that that is a dangerous dog. If you modify it by it having to be in a menacing fashion, you have reduced the opportunity of the health director to make a determination that an injury occurred, and that in turn, it would not have then been a dangerous dog. So I think we need to leave the wording as it is, let the health commissioner come back, and the health board come back to us and tell us that what we've done isn't working, and immediately take a look at it to see if we can't correct.
So basically, what you're saying, Mr. Gall, would be if that dog just jumps up and scratches somebody, the health commissioner has the ability to say, it just jumped up and scratched somebody, no problem.
And the problem is because you're basing it on a menacing fashion, and that's belief.
No, I'm saying the way it's written now.
That's correct.
It gives him broad
It gives
authority
him
to
the-
make a decision.
If we don't change it.
Right.
Yes, okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Mrs. Dickey?
So now, if my dog jumps up on someone to lick them, and they have a scratch, even though there was no intent and it's not dangerous, I'm gonna have to go out and buy expensive insurance, keep it in a pen with a lid, and
No.
muzzle it when I take it out, and,
Health commissioner could say, dog
Well,
was
he
just trying
could
to
do
lick
either one.
somebody. Right, well, I mean, okay.
He
Some
could
might
say,
not,
well,
some
you
might not
said
come up
injury, and
tomorrow, but
that's
I'm
an injury.
thinking it will.
Mr. President,
Mr. Wade?
with all due respect, that's better than the dog having to be shipped out of Salem, which is what the first effort was.
well, not if we make it define that injury.
All right, well, I think we've kind of covered all the discussion with this, so we have a motion and a second. And I think everybody understands the change that is being proposed. If the clerk pro tem would call the roll, please.
Mr. Cushman?
No.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Nestick?
No.
Mr. Gall?
No.
Mr. Paparotis?
No.
Motion fails, Mr. President.
All right. Is there any further discussion as to ordinance number 5? Seeing none, the clerk pro tem will please call the roll for passage on this, given this is the third readings of this evening.
Mr. Paparotis?
Yes.
Mr. Nestick?
Yes.
Mr. Gall?
Yes.
Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
No.
All right, it passes
Yes,
six
Mr.
to,
President.
thank you, 6 to 1. Mr. Whitehill.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to add the emergency clause to ordinance 6.
Is there a second with regards to that? Mr. Nestick? The clerk pro tem would call the roll, please.
Mr. Paparotis?
Yes.
Mr. Gall?
Yes.
Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Nestick?
Yes.
7 yeas, Mr. President.
Thank you, that will be added. Mr. Whitehill.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to suspend council rules so that ordinance 6 may be considered this evening.
All right, is there a second on that? Mr. Cushman, clerk pro tem would call the roll, please.
Mr. Paparotis?
Yes.
Mr. Gall?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Nestick?
Yes.
7 yeas, Mr. President.
All right. That passes. Mr. Whitehill.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to suspend statutory rules so that I may read ordinance 6 in its entirety this evening.
All right, is there a second with regards to that? Mr. Nestick. Clerk pro tem would please call the roll.
Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Gall?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Nestick?
Yes.
Mr. Paparotis?
Yes.
7 yeas, Mr. President.
All right, that passes. Clerk pro tem would please read ordinance number 6 in its entirety for its third reading this evening with emergency clause.
Being an ordinance creating and adopting section 505.20 of chapter 505 of the codified ordinances of the city of Salem and declaring an emergency. Now therefore it be ordained by the council of the city of Salem, state of Ohio, section 1, that section 505.20 of chapter 505 of the codified ordinances of the city of Salem is hereby created and adopted as follows. Hearings for dog designation. A, the municipal court or county court that has territorial jurisdiction over the residence of an owner, keeper, or harbor of a dog shall conduct any hearings concerning the designation of the dog as a nuisance dog, dangerous dog, or vicious dog. B, if the health commissioner and/or the director of environmental health of the municipal health department or such other person authorized to enforce this chapter has reasonable cause to believe that a dog in the person's jurisdiction is a nuisance dog, dangerous dog, or vicious dog, the person shall notify the owner, keeper, or harborer of that dog by certified mail or in person of both of the following. 1, that the person has designated the dog a nuisance dog, dangerous dog, or vicious dog as applicable. 2, that the owner, keeper, or harborer of the dog may request a hearing regarding the designation in accordance with this section. The notice shall include instructions for filing a request for a hearing in the county in which the dog's owner, keeper, or harborer resides. C, if the owner, keeper, or harborer of the dog disagrees with the designation of the dog as a nuisance dog, dangerous dog, or vicious dog as applicable, the owner, keeper, or harborer, not later than 10 days after receiving notification of the designation, may request a hearing regarding the determination. The request for a hearing shall be in writing and shall be filed with the municipal court or county court that has territorial jurisdiction over the residence of the dog's owner, keeper, or harborer. At the hearing, the person who designated the dog as nuisance dog, dangerous dog, or vicious dog has the burden of proving by clear and convincing evidence that the dog is a nuisance dog, dangerous dog, or vicious dog. The owner, keeper, or harborer of the dog, or the person who designated the dog as a nuisance dog, dangerous dog, or vicious dog, may appeal the court's final determination as in any other case filed in that court. D, a court upon motion of an owner, keeper, or harborer, or an attorney representing the owner, keeper, or harborer, may order that the dog designated as a nuisance dog, dangerous dog, or vicious dog be held in the possession of the owner, keeper, or harborer until the court makes a final determination. Under this section, or during the pendency of an appeal as applicable. Until the court makes a final determination and during the pendency of any appeal, the dog shall be confined or restrained in accordance with the provisions of section 505.18B that apply to dangerous dogs, regardless of whether the dog has been designated as a vicious dog or a nuisance dog rather than a dangerous dog. The owner, keeper, or harborer of the dog shall not be required to comply with any other requirements established in the revised code that concern a nuisance dog, dangerous dog, or vicious dog as applicable until the court makes a final determination and during the pendency of any appeal. E, if a dog is finally determined under this section or on appeal as described in this section to be a vicious dog, dangerous dog, or nuisance dog as defined in section 505.19, then the court shall issue an order that specifies which provisions of section 505 apply with respect to the dog and the owner, keeper, or harborer in that manner. Division D of section 955.11 and divisions D to I of section 955.22 of the revised code apply with respect to the dog and the owner, keeper, or harborer of the dog, as if the dog were a dangerous dog, and section 955.54 of the revised code applies with respect to the dog as if it were a dangerous dog, and the court shall issue an order that specifies that those provisions apply with respect to the dog and owner, keeper, or harborer in that manner. As part of the order, the court shall require the owner, keeper, or harborer to obtain the liability insurance required under section 505.18C and division E1 of section 955.22 of the revised code in an amount described in division H2 of section 955.99 of the revised code. F, as used in this section, nuisance dog, dangerous dog, and vicious dog have the same meanings as in section 955.11 of the revised code and section 505.19 of the codified ordinances.
All right, is there any discussion with regards to ordinance number 6? Mr. Gall.
Mr. President, may I inquire of the law director? I'm sorry I didn't think of this sooner. The only way that this works is if the health commissioner by certified mail or in person notifies the owner. Now, we both know certified mail doesn't have to be picked up. And are we expecting the health commissioner to go out and knock on the door and tell the owner? I'm asking if it's possible to amend this by adding the words certificate of mailing after certified mail, comma, certificate of mailing or in person. My problem is service of this notice.
Mr. President? Thank you.
Attorney Zellers.
Mr. Gall, certainly service is an issue because of the burden placed on the designee or designator of the dog, and in this case our health commissioner. I think that's why the certified mail or the personal service is required, so that the 10 days, there's an absolute start on the 10 days, and we know that we have service, rather than sending a mail maybe to an address that may not be in effect any longer or something of that nature. I believe, and Mrs. Dickey or Mr. Whitehill or whoever was at the meeting can refresh my recollection, but I believe that our health commissioner did indicate that he would in fact personally go and serve those notices. Is that correct?
You
You
did.
did say that.
Okay. So, I understand what you're saying.
We're
'cause-
asking him to go to a house where the owner is about to be told his dog is vicious and he has to remove it. We're asking him to do that.
Well, I think he could and probably would be accompanied by one of our police officers as well.
And I'll stop, but certificate of mailing is proof of service to all legal instruments if there's a failure on certified mail. And certificate of mailing must come back if it is not actually served at that address. And I'm just indicating that we add another way to knock on the door. But if you've had this discussion already, I will withdraw my comments, but we do it all the time. We send legal documents by certified mail, they're not picked up. We send it by certificate of mailing, and that's service. If that certificate of mailing is returned to the post office, obviously we have a failure.
Well, that's certainly correct. And again, I will indicate that this language came straight from the Ohio Revised Code. I don't know if that was discussed legislatively down there, but most of those guys and ladies are lawyers, so they're probably aware of that as well. I don't know why that wasn't added in there, Mr. Gall, but we do use that certainly in our practices on a daily basis. But I do think our health commissioner's intent was to serve these in person. So we had an absolute record of when they received it to start the 10-day clock ticking.
Mr.
To
Whitehill.
be clear, Mr. Gall can still make that motion, correct?
Oh,
To-
yeah.
To amend the language.
Absolutely.
So if it-
I do move to amend the language by adding the word certificate of mailing.
Right.
After certified mail, comma, certificate of mailing, or in person.
Can I have clarification? Mr. Gall, just to clarify, are you indicating certificate of mailing after failure, or after somebody doesn't pick up certified mail, or are you just saying as a separate type of service? Because if it's unclaimed, as in our law practices, unclaimed, then we can send certificate of mailing as proof of service.
Can we say certified mail or if necessary? Certificate of mailing?
Well, couldn't we, if you want to do this, say by certified mail, and if said certified mail is unclaimed or refused, then by certificate of mailing.
Please.
But I think we should add, and it's been a while since I've looked at this in the Civil Rules of Procedure, but I think that there is, what, a 3-day allowance on that they consider the time to take to serve it before the actual time runs?
It's the failure of service from the post office, so when you get your green card back, there isn't a time frame.
No time frame with the,
It's whenever it happens, you can do it immediately there.
no, I understand that, but when you send out by certificate of mail, how many days is allowed for the delivery of that regular mail? I think that there's something in the,
Oh, you're talking
Civil
about
rules.
Civil rules of service.
right. Because if we just say that it's then, what would be the time frame to start the clock ticking? When it gets mailed out? Or adding that period of time in with regards to it? I'll get to you in a second.
Well, we can't let the attorneys keep going on this, because nobody else knows the difference between all this stuff. You know, so
Go ahead.
why don't we just strike by certified mail and just say in person? Because you'd rather have it in person anyhow, you want proof, you know, and just say in person.
Also, Mr. President,
Mayor.
just a point of clarity here. The 10-day period of which you speak is the 10-day confinement period or is there some other 10-day period that you're speaking of? Because the health commissioner will designate immediately upon notification and evidence that there has been some sort of an attack, start the clock on the 10-day incubation period.
Mayor, just so I'm clear, I'm referring to the 10-day appeal period of the designation
Okay,
in section C.
okay.
And because we're dealing with the court, I think that's why we want to be very clear that the service was proper. I'd hate to lose one of these on a service issue.
Mr. Nestic?
When the sheriff serves an eviction notice, what's the process? I mean, don't they sometimes just stick a sticker on the door and say you gotta get out? I mean, so if we do it in person and we follow that process, and if no one's there, you put a sticker on the door, then you served them.
If we're gonna get into
I'm just saying.
all of that with regards to it, the easiest thing would be to say, by the rules of civil procedure, 4 point whatever the number
Civil
is.
Rule 4, I don't know that.
Civil Rule 4, you could say, that covers everything. It covers what you just brought up, covers what we were talking about,
In first.
as opposed to keep trying to get language in, well, because basically all the language we're adding is Civil
And
Rule 4.
I appreciate that. Obviously, though, I exactly like Attorney Zeller says, your issue is going to be service. When the issue is going to be when the 10 days of appeal starts, it's going to be who you gave it to, if you gave it to the wife or the 18-year-old boy at the household. Then the question is, who's going to be the owner of the dog? I mean, who owns the dog? So
think all
I
of
guess
that-
if we say civil rule, as per civil rules, I think that would cover my issue and allow it to be served in any manner allowed by law. And that, if you will allow me to withdraw my original motion and make that amendment, I would like to do such.
Right. Is there a second with regards to that, of all the non-attorneys that I'm looking at? Mrs. Dickey? Is there any further discussion with regards to that or questions? Seeing none, the clerk pro tem would call the roll on that motion, please.
Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Gall?
Yes.
Mr. Nestic?
Yes.
Mr. Paparotis?
Yes.
7 yeas, Mr. President.
All right, that passes. What do we need to do at this point?
Yes, I guess then, are you reading it in its entirety?
We
Oh, you
already
already did
had
that?
We did that.
We did
We just need to vote.
Now we need to vote. Well, yes, okay, we made that amendment.
All right. Any further discussion then with the amendment as it was added in with regards to it as to ordinance number 6? Seeing none, the clerk pro tem would call the roll on ordinance number 6 for passage this evening.
Mr. Nestic?
Yes.
Mr. Gall?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Mr. Paparotis?
Yes.
7 yeas, Mr. President.
Thank you. That passes. That concludes the second and third reading of ordinances and resolutions. Move on then to introduction of ordinances and resolutions. Mrs. Dickey.
I can't even remember what the ordinance is now after all that. All right. I would like to suspend council rules so that ordinance 10 can be read tonight for its first reading. But before we do that, we need to include the amendment that was made by committee
If you'd let everybody know what that was.
in 351.16, Section A. We were deleting "when necessary to avoid conflict with other traffic," or, so that it reads, "No person shall park a vehicle except when necessary to," wait, that's not right. No person shall park a vehicle except to comply with provisions of this traffic code or while being in the lawful direction of a police officer in any of the following places.
Does everybody understand the change that was made in committee? And we have the motion.
When did the committee meet?
Just
So they-
before
Oh.
this. That's why we had to suspend
Suspension of the
council
council
rules.
Mr. Nestor?
Can I ask what the purpose of the change was? I mean, please explain why we're taking out when necessary to avoid conflict with other traffic.
Because we felt that that was unenforceable. It was very vague, and it allowed people to just ignore the ordinance.
With regard to that, this really wouldn't be the time to raise that question, as we're only asking for a first reading. The committee made the change already.
Oh, I see.
With
Okay, I thought
regards
she was
to it.
making a motion to make that change.
No, it was done in
Okay.
committee this evening. All right, so we have a motion to suspend the council rules with regards to this. A second, Mr. Gall. The clerk pro tem would call the roll with regards to that, please.
Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Nestic?
Yes?
Mr. Gall?
Yes.
Mr. Paparotis?
Yes.
7 yeas, Mr. President.
Thank you. That passes. Mrs. Dickey, asking for the first reading.
Yes, I would like to ask that ordinance 10 then have its first reading this evening
All right, if the clerk pro tem.
by
would-
title only.
Thank you. Would read
Thank you.
ordinance number 10 by title only for its first reading this evening.
Being an ordinance creating and adopting section 351.16 of chapter 351 of the codified ordinances of the city of Salem.
All right. That concludes the, oh, no, it doesn't. Getting ahead of myself. Mr. Nestic.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I request that, I move that the Secretary Pro Tem read Resolution 13 in its entirety for passage this evening.
Would the clerk pro tem please read resolution number 13 in its entirety for passage this evening?
This is the Jeff Hughes, correct?
That is correct.
Being a resolution commending Jeff Hughes for his dedicated service to the city of Salem as an employee of the Salem Fire Department from March 9th, 1990 to January 22nd, 2016, and as fire chief of the Salem Fire Department from January 5th, 2008 to January 22nd, 2016. Whereas the members of the Salem City Council wish to express our appreciation and commend Jeff Hughes for his dedicated service.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Nestic.
Thank you.
Oh,
We have to
sorry.
vote on that, right?
You don't have to.
Long night. We'll take the vote on that.
We have to vote on a resolution? Okay.
Yes. If you would go ahead and call the roll, please.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Gall?
Yes.
Mr. Nestic?
Yes.
Mr. Paparotis?
Yes.
7 yeas, Mr. President.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Nestic.
Yes, Mr. President, I move that the clerk pro tem read resolution number 14 in its entirety for passage this evening.
All right, if the clerk pro tem would read resolution number 14 in its entirety, this is the one dealing with Mr. Hayward.
Being a resolution commending William Hayward for his dedicated service to the city of Salem as Director of Environmental Health at the Salem City Health District from January 3rd, 2011 to December 23rd, 2015. Whereas the members of the Salem City Council wish to express our appreciation and commend William Hayward for his dedicated service.
And the clerk pro tem would call the roll on that, please.
Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Gall?
Yes.
Mr. Nestic?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Mr. Paparotis?
Yes.
7 yeas, Mr. President.
Thank you. Mr. Nestic.
Yes, Mr. President, I move that the clerk pro tem read resolution number 15 in its entirety for passage this evening.
Right, if the clerk pro tem would read resolution number 15 in its entirety for passage this evening.
Being a resolution commending James Wooding for his dedicated service to the city of Salem as an employee of the Salem Utilities Department from November 25th, 1985 to November 30th, 2015. Whereas the members of the Salem City Council wish to express our appreciation and commend James Wooding for his dedicated service.
All right, if the clerk pro tem would please call the roll on that resolution number 15 for passage this evening.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Gall?
Yes.
Mr. Nestic?
Yes.
Mr. Paparotis?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
7 yeas, Mr. President.
Thank you. That doesn't take care of the introduction of ordinance and resolutions. We'll move on to pleasure of council. Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to remind residents of the Second Ward, anybody else that would like to attend, that I'm still having my meeting on Saturday, the 20th, at 2 p.m. in the afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Dickey.
I think this was the longest meeting we've ever had. It probably was, definitely a record breaker. But I want to thank everybody who hung in there with us. I think we got some really important things done, even though I think they could have been done better. That's just my opinion. And we did accomplish some things that will make this city safer. And we'll see how it works, and hopefully it will be a good thing.
And Mr. Cushman.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to first thank Jeff Hughes, William Hayward, and James Wooding for their service to the city. Fine men, indeed. My questioning of the evaluations of the RFQ is not an indictment on the mayor, his administration, or on Howes and Baird. I question the weighting process not because I think anything was done wrong, because I want what's right for Salem. And in this case, I think what's right is an equitable grading process that rewards a firm's background and similar project experience higher than their proximity to the job site or past performance for the city. Also, Mrs. Dickey's argument for changing the language on the dog ordinance was passionate and convincing. I used to be a newspaper carrier, and I was more than once on the receiving end of one of those little dogs, so I know all about that. But I think we can't overreach or overreact or be judge and jury in that regard. Now, I'm not trying to impugn the emotional stories we heard this evening, not by any means. But I think we need to be fair and to trust the reporting of the police officers in the judgment of the health director. And finally, I would like to acknowledge the stamina of the audience this evening. Wouldn't be surprised if we never see you at another council meeting again. That is all.
Mr. Paparotis.
I'd like to comment on the evaluation process for the streets project and the evaluation. And although everything was well-received and informative and well taken, I just wanted to mention that the price of oil is in line with the price of blacktop, and as a commodity, that can change quickly, and so it may be prudent to get this done as quickly as we can, because we may save money on the one end, on the engineering, and lose money on the goods that we bought. So,
Thank
Thank
you. Mr. Gall.
I had the opportunity, Mr. President, to be at the Salem Day, which was located at the Shell Factory in Fort Myers, Florida, last Saturday. And what is very special is the 140 people that were there, even though not living in Salem at the moment, still have their hearts in Salem. It was a real delight. A lot of graduates from Salem High School, very happy to see each other. The lunch lasted 4 hours, so they had a good time talking with each other, and it's a very special day, and congratulations to those who put that together. The other item I would like to mention, we're all familiar with Kennedy and Tanglewood and Oak and the Medical Park, Monroe Apartments, buildings throughout the community they were all constructed by two gentlemen, Joe Delansky and Gene Salevi. Gene died last Sunday morning in Naples. Probably most of the people no longer know who he was, but the amount of buildings, both commercial and housing, probably reaches 50, 60, even 70 homes in this community. And he will be sorely missed, and I do like to extend my personal condolences to Nancy and his children, Jeff and Sally. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Nestic?
At the risk of making this meeting last longer, I will, I just want to point out what Mr. Paparotis says. We run a risk here, by delaying this engineering work. I don't know if everybody appreciates the amount of time it takes to put an RFP process together and go through the bidding process on the pavement companies. And that's one of the first things that the engineering firm has to do is put that bid package together and then go through the bidding process with the paving companies. We're delaying that, and not only that, but if we go through the requalification process, we stand a chance of having a higher bid come in that we'll have to accept for the engineering services. So that there is a risk for that too. So anyhow, I just want to make sure that people bring that to light, and then I want to say, finally, like Mr. Cushman said, appreciate the work of the people that we recognize tonight, appreciate the work of the streets people, and Mr. Whitehill gets a reading star tonight for his work, and Ms. Bricker picked the right time to go on vacation, so.
Nice job, David.
Mr. Whitehill?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm convinced it was deliberate, perhaps, not really. To Mr. Paparotis' point, there are some in the oil and gas industry that hope the oil goes up soon. I want to thank the council as well as the people who attended the meetings, the personal stories, the input that we've had from the community. It's been quite a while since this much thought and input went into ordinances that have come before this committee. So agree or disagree with some of the decisions and motions, this council and the people involved should be very proud of the hard work that's gone into that. This is a huge step towards this problem. As I discussed with Mr. Chambers the other day, unfortunately, I don't think there's much that we're going to do that's going to avoid the first time that it happens. There should be no free bite, but it's also very difficult to prevent versus react. I'm saddened to learn of Mr. Zalevi's passing. I own a home that was built by Mr. Zalevi and added on to by Mr. Zalevi. I remember him well as my parents built the house, and I later purchased it from them. So thoughts and prayers are with him, with his family. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to also give my sentiments to the gentleman that we recognized this evening. Certainly had a lot of work put forth by them in the community. We should be thankful for that and for people that are willing to do that. On a note of levity, Mr. Nestic kind of took what I was going to say about Mrs. Bricker, but I will add that given her luck, she should probably buy a lottery ticket. And on a more serious note, and I said it when I came on to council and was sitting over there the first evening, I said, we might not always agree on things, but we can always conduct ourselves as ladies and gentlemen. And I think that we accomplished that tonight because this was an issue that obviously drew a lot of passion and is an important issue to the community. But I also remember previous councils, none of which anybody was sitting here, that there was yelling and screaming going on, which why a president would allow that to happen, I don't know. But certainly I commend everybody for how they conduct themselves here. That's all I have.